Let's get ready for some NFL football. Somebody who I've enjoyed having on in the past. I love reading his stuff on The Athletic. A real film breakdown of what's going on in some of these NFL matchups. It's Ted Nguyen. All right, man. Let's get into this Baltimore Buffalo deal. All right. So, I mean, some of these cases we have previous games to look at. Week 4 here, Baltimore just gashes Buffalo. They run it all over them. This is also the 7th time in NFL history we've had a matchup of two teams who've averaged over 30-plus points a game during the regular season. So I know that some of the questions will be similar in the like, what do you see from the film there that you think is repeatable? Some of the adjustments, where the teams are right now. So wherever you want to go on that first one that we're all looking forward to.
Yeah, I think, in the wild card round, we saw a bunch of rematches that, you couldn't really take a lot from because the teams are so different. And I think that there are some things you can take from the first game with the Bills and the Ravens. Like, for example, the Bills' run defense hasn't improved much. They're still a bad run defense. They're very light. So I could see the Ravens gashing them on the ground. The first play of the game in that game was like a 98-yard touchdown from Derrick Henry. So I don't know how they're going to improve in that front or how they're going to try to stop Derrick Henry. Last week against the Steelers, the Ravens kind of went back to this like option Lamar Jackson offense where Derrick Henry was in a shotgun. They usually like to run him from the pistol under center. I think they're going to go back to just being a heavy offense where they're just going to run Derrick Henry and then they're going to play action off of it. You're not going to see as much option football from Lamar Jackson just because the Bills front is so light. On the offensive side of the ball, the Bills are much different. I mean, in the early parts of the season, they were really struggling because they didn't have a separator. They were throwing a bunch of targets to Mac Hollins, who's like a special teams guy. Keon Coleman wasn't quite the receiver he is now. Not that he's like an all-star ball winner right now, but he's much more effective than he was early in the season. So this is a game where Amari Cooper has to show up, and he's been pretty inconsistent, and they haven't really targeted him much. But the Ravens are going to challenge these receivers, and somebody's going to have to win on the outside for Josh Allen.
The Pittsburgh-Baltimore game, going into it, and I've already covered this on Monday, where I'd watch the two teams play, and I'd be like, how does Pittsburgh keep beating this team? And some of the history was Lamar's availability, and then they get him towards the end of the regular season, but then it was so dominant during Wild Card weekend. And you did a breakdown of kind of the different attacks that Pittsburgh thought they could go into this with it. Did Baltimore just solve Pittsburgh without any adjustments, or is it just the way Baltimore is rolling right now? Because I thought the breakdown was just really good on like the responsibilities of the linebackers, yet it seemed like Baltimore was just so comfortable with everything Pittsburgh tried to do, or the lack of adjustments from Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I mean, they're comfortable because Pittsburgh only had one answer against Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry in the option game. And usually when you're going against the option game, you have to have multiple answers. And you have multiple ways to play that option. And one of the ways you play it is called scrape exchange, where you have the defensive end crash into the running back, forcing Lamar Jackson to keep the ball. And then you have a linebacker loop around and take Lamar Jackson. And you could do that sporadically. You could do it, once or twice to kind of surprise them. But for some reason, Pittsburgh just decided that's the only answer we're going with, and we're sticking with it the entire game. And the Ravens just kept on having different answers for it, and they just gashed them for big plays. I mean, they just put a tie down on the backside and blocked the end, and then that way there's nobody crashing on a running back. Opened up the A gap, and that's how you get that big Derrick Henry run. So. I mean, if you're the Bills watching that tape, you could have a scrape exchange and you could have that strategy in your game plan, but you also need to know that you have to have 3 or 4 other strategies to try to stop the option so that they don't just at least make him think, at least make Lamar Jackson think a little bit and make him a little indecisive about the option. But again, I don't think the option is going to be a huge part of this game because I just think the Bills are very light up front and they don't have to do that. They could just line up Derrick Henry behind Lamar Jackson and hand the ball off.
Yeah, I'm with you on the Pittsburgh thing. Just watching that game where it was like, okay, they're going to attack the running back. They're not going to wait. They're going to attack. And then it's like, okay, but now Lamar just kind of knows every single time. So like I've wondered at times with Lamar over the course of the season if they've paced him to just unleash this version of him. And maybe I'll just pivot this into a question of, like, maybe it was Pittsburgh specific. Maybe it was about getting him ready for like the full arsenal of it, but also to like what other people who've come on and talked to us, like whether it was Fitzpatrick or Foxworth, have been like, look, this is just a very different approach because they knew they needed to be something post Greg Roman for Lamar to have a better chance in the playoffs. So take that wherever you want to go and kind of your expectations for Lamar in this version, because obviously it hasn't worked out for him.
Yeah, I think this is the first time where they don't have to be an option team because they have the option to, or they have the ability to just line up behind center and just hand the ball off to Derrick Henry. And, part of the option football is it you're putting more on the shoulders of the quarterback. So now that you could just hand the ball off to Derrick Henry, the quarterback could take a break. Like, you don't have to have the quarterback be part of the play every single time. And that's part of the appeal of having a run game is, it's not always on the shoulder of the quarterback. And when you have a run game that involves a quarterback, he's part of it every play. And that's part of who the Ravens have been. And now that doesn't have to be all on Lamar's shoulders. So I think, especially against this Bills front where they are lighter. I just think the Ravens just have so many things they could do offensively where it doesn't all has to be a Lamar every time. And I think Lamar has talked about it where he has been jittery in playoff games. And you can see in that Pittsburgh game too, they didn't want to pass the ball a ton, and they were having a lot of success in the run game. But I think part of that was just to calm Lamar down and just give him a little bit of a mental break and let him get into the flow of the game.
On the Buffalo side of this, I'd agree. Like, I don't know that there's anything we can really point to, and the Rams game wasn't that long ago where, it feels like, at least if you're picking the game, like the Baltimore rushing attack against this Bills front. But if we look at Buffalo's offensive line, and I don't know how much you put into the pass block win rate and rush win rate stuff, but if you go by individual players, like Buffalo has like 3 guys that are just off the charts on these grades. And there was something else I was looking at this morning that I thought was really interesting, and how often they line up with a 6th offensive lineman. It's number 1 in the league, 148 plays this year. It's like 60 more than the number 2 team. And they did it a bunch against Denver. Is that something? I mean, certainly you have to be prepared for it if you're Baltimore, but is that something against Baltimore's front where you feel like Buffalo is going to want to go to that as they have during the regular season?
Yeah, it's a big part of their offense now where they are moving under center more and just taking Josh Allen out of the equation and just being able to hand the ball off to James Cook. I think part of that is just the league is moving towards very light fronts, more 2 high boxes. So a lot of the really good teams are ahead of that, and they've built this really strong run game where they could attack those fronts just by running the running back instead of having the option and that sort of deal too. And the Bills have a very strong offensive line. Deion Dawkins, I think, is having a career year at left tackle. Spencer Brown is playing really well at right tackle. But the Ravens also have the number 1 run defense in the league. So I don't know if they can just go to their 6 offensive lineman sets and run the ball like they did against the Broncos. They just straight up bullied the Broncos. Like they got under center and they just bullied them up front. You're not going to be able to do that against this Ravens front. I think this is a game where you're going to have to spread them out and you're going to have to run Josh Allen a ton. He's going to have to be a huge part of the running game against this Ravens front.
Okay, let's take a look at Philadelphia and the Rams. The Rams, as we all know, started 1-4. I think there's some stuff that you could talk about, like looking back schedule-wise. But, getting blasted by Arizona week 2 by 30 points was like, okay, what's going to happen here? The offensive line was a massive problem. The injuries at receiver. And they come out and they dominate Minnesota. Real quick, do you think there was anything from the Minnesota-Detroit game that impacted Shula, a D coordinator's approach to what they wanted to do against Darnold?
Yeah, I think the Rams are typically a zone team. They like to play back a little bit and just kind of keep everything in front of them. But they were much more aggressive against the Vikings. They were pressing them, doubling Justin Jefferson, just not giving those receiver free releases. And then that allowed the pass rush to really work against a Minnesota offensive line that's pretty weak. Their best tackle, Brian O'Neill, he struggled in that game. Cab Robinson has struggled all season. and the interior line is really bad. So once you force Sam Darnold to hold the ball a little bit and let that pass rush get to work, they have a lot of problems. So I don't know if they're going to do that against the Eagles. I think the number one thing is they're going to have to try to stop Saquon Barkley. But this is going to be a much different game for the Rams. I think against Minnesota, it was just a good matchup. Some of the strengths versus their weaknesses kind of matched up very well. This is going to be a much, much different game for the Rams.
Yeah, you could hear like why I really like Aikman on a broadcast is when he's kind of over something, he lets you know without being nasty about it. But watching Darnold drop back and hold on to the football and just the tone of Aikman's voice as it kept happening. And at like one point where you could just tell he was over it, then it happened, I think, like the next play. And he's just, he's telling the audience in a way without necessarily using his words, which I thought was just really like high level stuff because you're just watching Darnold have this awful game. All right. So we go back and look at the midseason matchup with the Rams here. The Eagles and Barkley just absolutely gashed him. They got all over Stafford, 5-6 sacks in that one. But yeah, it's the Rams feel like that. Not a great record. I kind of hate that nobody wants to play this team because we've got 8 teams left. Like most of them are going to be really good. There's not really anybody going to be sneaking into this unless you were to get some sort of upset, whatever. But just kind of looking at that matchup to where the Rams are now might be because I don't really know what to make of the Green Bay game because of Hurts essentially being out of action for almost a month. It wasn't great on offense. It's not what you would want, but I think to be fair, you have to look at it being a pretty abnormal situation for Hurts going into his first playoff game this year.
Yeah, for sure. It just felt like they didn't want to take a lot of risk with Jalen Hurts. A lot of the passing game was very simple, and they've been better throughout the season. And, maybe they just felt like their defense was going to win the game for them and they didn't have to take too many chances. And against the Rams, they could fall into a similar script. But obviously the Rams offense is playing much better now. They have a healthy offensive line and healthy receiving group. And during the season, it was like either the receivers were healthy and the offensive line couldn't get healthy. But now that they're both healthy, the offense should be much better than they were against the Eagles when they played in the regular season. But also, there have been stretches where Matthew Stafford just has struggled against some of the better defenses. They had like a 3-game stretch in the season where they really were inconsistent. And part of the reason why they're so good against the Vikings is because the Vikings blitz a lot. They try to do a bunch of like coverage disguises and all that. But Matthew Stafford is a veteran quarterback. He's one of the smartest quarterbacks in the league, and he could figure that stuff out. But against the Eagles, they do a lot of disguising, but they don't rely on the blitz to get home. They don't rely on trickery. They could just play you straight up because they have very good players on all across the board. So this could be a matchup where Stafford does struggle. I don't think it's going to be just the Rams are healthy, they're explosive on offense again. I could see them struggling against this Eagles defense.
And the Eagles not going to have my guy Nakobe Dean
Yeah.
At middle linebacker, which is super frustrating because I've just so had like he's one of my favorite college players, and I'll just have these moments where I'm like, well, he has to be good in the pros, even though I realize he was undersized. He gets off to kind of the slow start. You're like, how many snaps is this guy even getting? And then once he figures it all out, and with Bond, like this group. I think the personnel turnover, you could even speak to what the Rams have been doing here in the draft. Now it's nice they have some picks, like all the young guys on that defense for the Rams, like overhauling that roster in a really, really short amount of time. But then when you think about the Eagles just kind of reloading from being in the Super Bowl 2 years ago to the guys that they have, and Nolan Smith starting to make plays, and obviously Carter's always fun to watch there. So you feel like there's enough depth, even though the Dean loss is a significant loss. There should be enough skill, enough playmakers around that defense that it's not going to derail who they are on defense.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's take a look at Houston and Kansas City. Now, I love some of your notes on Houston for this one because we've had Sando on for years, and the Cook Index, we all love it. Like your tendencies, how aggressive you are in the passing game when the score is not dictating play calling, and all that kind of good stuff. Houston does not cook traditionally. I think you had the note. I think I read it from you, where if you look at 3rd and 10 or more yards, right? So just absolutely brutal third down situations. Houston had the second most 3rd and 10 plus downs, third down, 3rd and 10 plus. Again, I screwed that up. But the second most in the NFL, behind only Cleveland, which is not where you want to be as you're going into the playoffs. And it looked like that was going to be the approach against the Chargers. What happened in that game? I mean, there's a lot of stuff, the Herbert stuff as well, but what happened specific to maybe the play calling and the aggressiveness that we saw from Houston that we're not used to seeing with their OC?
Yeah, so cook rate basically measures how aggressive you are as far as passing the ball on early downs before the score could really, like if you're up by a lot of points, then obviously you're going to run the ball a little bit more. Or in a 2-minute drill, you're not going to run the ball. So cook rate takes account of all that. And the against the Chargers, the Texans had the highest cook rate they had the entire season by far. So Bobby Slowick, who is typically a run pass guy, which puts them is one of the reasons why they get in so many 3rd and longs is because they can't run the ball. They are the least efficient run game in the entire league. They have the lowest success rate as far as run in the entire league, lower than the Raiders. And the Raiders were god awful this season. But he keeps going to this run pass, and then they get 0 yards, and then all of a sudden you're in 3rd and 10, and you expect C.J. Stroud to kind of save you. And for a part of the season, he was doing that pretty well, but then that kind of just catches up to you after a while, and that's one of the reasons why the Houston offense has been so disappointing. But against the Chargers, they passed a little bit more on early downs. They spread out. They got into empty sets. Got into 4-by-1 sets and got Nico Collins ISO'd up. So they found ways to just quickly get rid of the ball and create some positive yards on first down. And after the Chargers defense got worn down, that's when the run game kind of took over. And you saw Joe Mixon take over in that game. And we got to give a lot of credit to Joe Mixon because in that game, there were so many times where they had penetration and he was able to just find a way to wiggle his way out and get some yards. I mean, this Texans offensive line is just not very good at run blocking or pass blocking.
Yeah, that's what's weird is because I was looking at some of the win rate stuff again, and I was surprised to see Houston on the better side of some of the pass block win rate stuff, but the run stuff is just abysmal across the board. And I think this is important stuff though, because there's so much of it is just focused on, well, look at Stroud and, there's a slight decline and he was so clean in the interception part of it. Like, unless you're peak Aaron Rodgers or Brady, you're probably not staying down at that low of a number with the interceptions. So then it's kind of labeled as like, well, Stroud's taking a step back. And, look, again, there's statistical stuff to tell you that this is exactly what's going to happen. But if it's long developing routes for a team where you don't like the O-line that is sort of run predictable at all those times, maybe there's more baked into it. You know what I mean? More that there's another level of understanding with the quarterbacks because I think most of us are huge fans of Stroud. Like Fitzpatrick coming on last week saying like he wants his sons to watch how he throws a football. And I know that it's more than arm talent and all that kind of stuff, but I feel like over the long haul of like the Stroud experience, even going back to the Georgia game, there's just a lot with him that you would like and the way he just plays the position beyond just some of the talent stuff. Now, we pivot that into Kansas City because we know that they're going to dial up pressure. And I feel like Kansas City dials up pressure when you most expect it. Like it's actually very predictable that this is what we've been saving and we're not going to save it for a time to trick you. We're going to throw it at you when we need to throw it at you. How do you like that matchup for Houston's front, essentially?
It's going to be tough. I mean, this is as healthy as the Texans have been up front and in the secondary. They might get Watson back. And if you look at the splits and their defense when Watson was healthy and when he left, I mean, they're pretty dramatic. I mean, if you're a man coverage team, you need corners to play man coverage. And now they have potentially 2 cornerbacks that could kind of lock up the outside and buy some more time for them up front. And this is a very talented front with Charles Omenihu back in the lineup. Obviously Chris Jones. And we talked about how the Texans were able to get those quick passes on early downs, it's going to be much tougher against Kansas City because they're going to press you. They're going to press those receivers. And they did that in the Week 16 matchup. And for some reason, Slow kept on trying to throw these bubble screens, and they would get stopped for like negative yardage every single time. So I think, if he's smart, he's not going to do that anymore, especially against these press corners that are very good at tackling. And the thing that they had some success with is just throwing it deep to Tank Dell in that game where, they were seeing these heavy blitzes and Stroud was just backing up and trying to get some time and just chucking it deep to Tank Dell. And, they got that touchdown where Dell was unfortunately hurt off of it. But the question is, who's going to be that deep ball winner for the Texans now? They're going to double Nico Collins. Steve Spagnuolo is one of the best defense coordinators as far as taking away your number one weapon. So who's going to be that secondary guy that's going to be able to beat these Chiefs defenders? I don't know who that's going to be, whether they're going to turn to Mechie or they're going to, Robert Woods is not a deep ball winner at his age. So that's the big question for the Texans is who's going to be that guy that could take the top off the defense when they're doubling Collins and when they're bringing pressure.
We're a huge Robert Woods podcast, but I understand what you're saying. Kansas City red zone touchdown percentage. I looked it up again this morning. 22nd in the NFL. Not good. That's really bad. It usually means like you're just leaving points out there all the time. Usually means it's a quarterback maybe you don't trust. Maybe it's a play calling thing. All these different things. Except it is maybe the guy we trust more that's ever played the position. Still some work to do on the Brady resume. But then I looked it up last year, and they were 19th in red zone touchdown percentage. So actually across Mahomes' career, it's a little bit lower than you would think. There was a great year 2 years ago where they were second in touchdown percentage. I think the Chiefs are one of the weirdest teams I can ever remember going into the playoffs because the record is insane. We know all the close calls with them. We know that the offensive approach has changed. I don't know if that's a personnel thing. I don't know if it's a maturity thing with Holmes, but it's a depth of target thing. Kelsey's had 3 touchdowns this year, although I think he's been a bigger part of the offense the second half of the season. I don't really think that's debatable with any of this stuff. I think I'll ask it this way. Where do you rank Kansas City? Like if you could make money on, and I'm not even talking about a spread, but you get Baltimore, because I don't think anybody's picking Houston out of the equation here. If you get Baltimore, Buffalo, or Kansas City right now, who do you think is the best chance? Well, see, that question doesn't work either because Buffalo and Baltimore are playing each other. I guess I'll just ask it this way. Like, who do you think is the best team in the AFC today?
To me, is the Chiefs. I mean, they haven't been healthy all season. Now they're as healthy as they've ever been at any point this season. We know Patrick Mahomes kind of flips the switch in the playoffs. They have the playoff experience. It's just it's hard to pick anybody but Kansas City, in my opinion. And obviously the Ravens have an amazing roster. They're playing very well right now. But I just want to see Lamar Jackson be able to do it in the postseason, especially when he's going to be in a game where there's going to be a lot more on his shoulders. I thought, Pittsburgh was just kind of gave the game away with what they were doing, and really there was just not a ton of pressure on Lamar Jackson. But when he's faced off against a Josh Allen or a Mahomes, where he's in a bit of a shootout situation, how he's going to handle it. I mean, I love Lamar as much as anyone, but I just want to see him do it in this setting.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's the home field. It's hey, they get to play Houston, so there's an easier path conversation, but it sounds like we're just talking straight team. You're going Chiefs. All right, before we get your rapid fire picks, let's just finish with Washington and Detroit here. We know Detroit blitzes, I think, the second highest rate in the NFL, and yet Jaden Daniels is a young quarterback that seems to be comfortable against it. There's all sorts of numbers that tell you he's, I'd say at worst, top 10 quarterback against some of the pressure stuff. Going through the grade of the game against Tampa, there's probably some stuff you could pick apart from Jaden, except when you need him the most. He's doing the unthinkable, and he's saving a team and then doing it at a playoff level too, on top of everything else. So how do you see the Jaden attack against what Detroit is going to do, where I imagine it's probably a carryover from what we saw at the end of the regular season with Aaron Glenn? It's like, all right, if we don't have these guys healthy, we are just going to be as aggressive. We're not going to be passive and lose. We're going to be aggressive. If we lose that way, they'll just feel better about it because that seems to be the entire team's culture.
Yeah, they're going to blitz Jaden like crazy. I mean, part of the reason why you want to blitz a mobile quarterback is because you surround him with more bodies, so there's less of a chance that they could scramble. And you get into some of those cover zero blitzes, so they just throw the ball and get rid of it, so they're not trying to scramble around and create plays. But like you mentioned, Jaden Daniels has been phenomenal against the blitz all season. He's third in EPA against the blitz, and you usually don't see that with rookie quarterbacks. But he's just so calm, and he's able to throw the ball deep against the blitz too. He's not just throwing hot routes. Terry McLaurin's one of his favorite targets against the blitz, and you remember that cover zero blitz he beat at the end of the Cincinnati game that really kind of wowed everyone.
That was the first throw this year with him where I'm like, that throw is like all time stuff. So yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just wanted to back up. Like that was a moment on the couch where you go,
yeah,
it's pretty special. But go ahead.
So, I mean, we're going to have to see him try to beat this blitz deep because they play blitz and they're going to play a lot of man coverage. And they're probably going to do what they did against Sam Darnold and the Vikings, where they're going to double Justin Jefferson and try to dare somebody else to beat you. So Dynamic Brown, who's kind of come on as late, I think he's going to be a huge part of this game. But yeah, I mean, I think Detroit is going to do a good job of limiting what Jaden can do on the ground because they're just going to bring bodies at him. It's going to be tough for him to find running lanes. But if he does, I mean, it's probably going to be a big play because everybody's playing man coverage. But I think it's going to be up to guys like Zach Ertz and Dynamic Brown to win against one-on-one coverage. And the lines have been a little bit weaker against tight ends, especially after all the injuries. So we'll see if Ertz can do it. But also, the Lions are very good against the run too. So that's another problem for this Washington offense. And the Lions are likely going to score a lot, which is going to change the game script and force them into a passing game script, which is another difficult thing that the Commanders are going to have to deal with.
All right, rapid fire picks. Let's start in the AFC with the headliner, Buffalo, Baltimore.
I think the Ravens are going to win.
All right. Sounds like Kansas City over Houston. No surprise there.
Yeah.
And Detroit, Washington.
Detroit.
Rams, Eagles.
Eagles. I hate to be boring and pick all the favorites, but I have a tough time seeing an upset this week.
Look, I wish I had done it more during the college football playoff, but sometimes I try to get cute myself. And, maybe you'll feel better Monday if it goes all chalk. If you want to read more Ted stuff, check it out on The Athletic. I promise you will enjoy it, and it helps you get ready for some big playoff games. Thanks, man.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.